A mother stands in the rain with her two daughters, watching the door of their home close in their faces. They told her she didn't belong there, that her marriage to their son, their brother, their cousin meant nothing, that her children, his children, had no claim to their father's legacy. They used legal language and family tradition and coded words about keeping things in the right hands to justify stealing everything she had left for the man she loved. What they didn't know was that her late husband had left something behind, something hidden, something powerful, something that would expose every single lie they told. If you ever felt powerless against people who had money and connections and the entire system on their side, hit that like button right now, because this story will restore your faith that justice, even when it takes time, is real. The town of Millbrook, Alabama, was a kind of place where everyone knew your family name before they knew your first name, where Sunday church was still social currency, and old money spoke louder than new ideas. It was beautiful in a way that southern towns often are. Oak trees draped with Spanish moss, historic homes with wraparound porches, a main street that looked like it belonged on a postcard. But beauty can hide ugliness. And in Millbrook, certain families have been hiding their ugliness behind genteel manners and charitable donations for generations. Naomi Carter had learned this the hard way. She'd met Daniel Carter 7 years earlier at a tech conference in Birmingham. He was a software developer who'd built a successful company from the ground up. She was a graphic designer working freelance, building her own modest career. Their connection was immediate, not just attraction, but recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to work hard for everything you had. Daniel's family had not approved. They never said it directly, of course. That would have been crude. Instead, they communicated through absence, through polite distance, through conversations that somehow never included her, through Christmas cards addressed only to Daniel, through baby shower invitations that arrived weeks after the event had passed. Naomi knew what it was about. She'd known from the first family dinner, when Daniel's aunt had asked with surgical sweetness, "Where exactly are your people from, dear?" As if her blackness needed geographic justification. As if she were a visitor in a world where Daniel belonged, but she never would. Daniel had loved her fiercely despite his family's disapproval. Or perhaps because of it. He'd built a life with her that existed separately from them. A beautiful home. Two daughters who had his eyes and her smile. A partnership built on respect and genuine affection. Then came the accident. A highway collision on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Sudden. Senseless. The kind of tragedy that reminds you how fragile everything is. Daniel died before the ambulance arrived, leaving Naomi with two daughters under the age of 6 in a grief so vast it felt like drowning. The funeral was held at the family's church, a white column building that had stood for over 100 years. Naomi sat in the front row with her daughters, listening to relatives eulogize a man they'd barely made time for while he was alive. They spoke about his childhood, his accomplishments, his complicated choices. They looked past her as if she were invisible. After the service, people clustered in small groups, speaking in low voices. Naomi caught fragments of conversation that stopped when she approached. Whispers about the estate and family matters and unfortunate complications. Daniel's uncle, Richard, approached her with an expression of practiced sympathy. "Naomi, dear, we'll need to discuss some practical matters soon. Legal things. We want to help you through this difficult time." His tone suggested charity rather than obligation. She nodded, too exhausted by grief to question what he meant. In the days that followed, Naomi focused on her daughters, on helping them understand that Daddy wasn't coming home, on maintaining routines that gave them stability, while her own world had shattered. The bills kept coming. The mortgage payment loomed. She had some savings, but not enough to sustain them for long. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong, even though you had every right to be there? Ever felt invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to be family? Drop a comment below. Your story matters, and you're not alone. 3 weeks after the funeral, Richard called and asked Naomi to come to the family house to sort through some papers. He said it would help clarify things and make sure everything was handled properly. The house was a sprawling white mansion on the edge of town, the kind of property that had been in the Carter family for 4 generations. Daniel had grown up there. He brought Naomi there for Sunday dinners in the early years of their relationship, before the family's coldness had made those visits unbearable. When Naomi arrived with her daughters, Richard was waiting in Daniel's father's old study. He wasn't alone. Daniel's brother, Marcus, sat in one of the leather chairs. His Aunt Patricia stood by the window. All of them wore expressions of solemn purpose. The room smelled like old books and furniture polish. Family photos covered one wall, generations of Carters staring out from ornate frames. Naomi noticed that the photos of her and Daniel had been taken down. "Please sit," Richard said, gesturing to a chair across from the heavy oak desk. Her daughters went to play in the hallway, their voices echoing in the big house. Documents were spread across the desk in careful arrangement. Richard picked up a folder and opened it with deliberate slowness. "Naomi, we need to discuss this estate," he began. "Daniel's assets, the property, certain family holdings. It's complicated, as you might imagine." She waited, her stomach tight with an anxiety she couldn't name. "The house," he continued, not quite meeting her eyes, "has been in the Carter family for generations. It's not just property, it's legacy. Daniel's grandfather built the addition. His father renovated the kitchen. Every Carter child has been raised here. I understand it's important," Naomi said quietly. "Daniel told me." "What Daniel may have told you," Patricia interrupted, her voice crisp, "and what's legally documented are sometimes different things. Family property has certain protections, traditions that supersede individual wishes." Marcus leaned forward. "We're not trying to be difficult, Naomi. We're trying to do what's best for everyone, including your daughters." The words sounded generous, but something in his tone wasn't. Richard slid a document across the desk. "This outlines a family's position regarding the estate distribution. After consulting with our attorneys, we determined that the property and the primary assets need to remain within the direct family line. However, we're prepared to offer you a settlement, enough to help you get established somewhere else. It's more than fair." Naomi's hands trembled as she picked up the document. The legal language was dense, but the message was clear. They were claiming she had no legal right to the house, to Daniel's assets, to anything he'd built. "But Daniel and I were married," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We had a home. He provided for us. This can't be legal." "It's complicated," Richard repeated, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. "We have documentation showing that certain assets were held in family trusts. Daniel's personal debts exceeded what most people realize. What's left after settling those debts is minimal. The settlement we're offering is actually quite generous given the circumstances." "I don't understand," Naomi said. "Daniel's company. He sold it last year. There was money. He told me." "Business matters are complex," Patricia said coolly, "and private. What a husband shares with his wife isn't always the full picture." The cruelty was subtle but unmistakable. They were calling Daniel a liar, or calling her naive, or both. "We need you to vacate the premises by the end of the week," Marcus added. "We'll help you move, of course. We're not heartless." Naomi looked at the three of them, these people who shared Daniel's blood but none of his kindness. She thought about fighting, about demanding to see proof, about calling a lawyer she couldn't afford. But she was drowning in grief. She was alone. She was black in a southern town where the Carter family had influence she could never match. And she had two daughters who needed stability, not a legal battle that could drag on for years. "I'll need time to find a place," she said finally. "Of course," Richard replied, relief evident in his voice. "We're not monsters." That evening, Naomi packed what she could fit in her car. Her daughters cried as they left their rooms, their toys, the only home they'd known. She loaded boxes in the rain, water mixing with tears. She couldn't stop. As she drove away from the grand white house, she looked back once. The lights were on inside. Through the windows, she could see figures moving through rooms that had been hers just hours before. The rental she found was on the outskirts of town, a small two-bedroom that smelled like mildew and had carpet stains no amount of cleaning could remove. But it was shelter. It was something. That night, After her daughters finally fell asleep in the bedroom they now shared, Naomi sat on the worn couch and let herself break. She cried for Daniel, for her daughters, for the life that had been stolen from them. But Daniel had known his family better than they realized, and he'd planned accordingly. The weeks that followed were a blur of survival. Naomi took on extra freelance work, designing logos and websites late into the night after her daughters went to bed. She applied for assistance programs she'd never imagined needing. She shopped at thrift stores and learned to stretch a dollar further than she'd thought possible. The grief was still raw, but it was now complicated by something else, a gnawing sense that something hadn't been right about that meeting in the study, the way they'd rushed her, the legal language that didn't quite make sense, the refusal to show her actual documents. On a Saturday afternoon, while her daughters played in the small living room, Naomi went through the boxes she'd hastily packed from the house. Most of it was clothing and personal items. But one box contained files from Daniel's home office, tax returns, insurance policies, random paperwork she grabbed without looking. At the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of old utility bills, she found a manila envelope. It was sealed, thick, and across the front, in Daniel's handwriting, was her name. For Naomi, open immediately if anything happens to me. Her hands started shaking. She sat down on the floor, her heart pounding, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were several documents and a letter. She unfolded the letter first, and Daniel's voice seemed to speak from the page. My dearest Naomi, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I can't be there to protect you and our girls. I need you to know something. My family will try to take everything from you. I know them. I've watched how they operate my entire life. They'll use legal language and intimidation, and their name to make you believe you have no rights. They're wrong. Everything I have is yours. The house, the money from the company sale, all of it. I made certain of this legally. My attorney, James Morrison, has the original will and all documentation. His number is at the bottom of this letter. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them make you feel like you don't deserve what we built together. You are my wife. Our daughters are my children. Nothing about race or family history, or their prejudice changes that. Fight for what's yours. Fight for our girls. And know that I loved you more than anything in this world. Forever yours, Daniel. Naomi's tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. She set the letter aside carefully and looked at the other documents. The first was a will, official, notarized, dated 3 months before Daniel's death. It explicitly left everything to Naomi: the house, his portion of the company's sale proceeds, his investment accounts, everything. The second document showed the sale of his software company the previous year. The amount made her gasp. $1.2 million, split between Daniel and his business partner. Daniel's share, $600,000, placed in investment accounts with Naomi listed as the sole beneficiary. The third was a letter from James Morrison, Daniel's attorney, confirming that he held the original will and all supporting documentation. They had lied about everything. Naomi's grief transformed in that moment into something else, something harder, something that wouldn't be pushed aside or intimidated into silence. She found her phone and dialed the number at the bottom of Daniel's letter. James Morrison answered on the third ring. When she explained who she was, his tone shifted immediately to concern. Mrs. Carter, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Daniel's family told me you'd moved out of state and didn't want to be contacted. I knew something wasn't right, but I had no way to find you. They lied to you, Naomi said, her voice steady now. They lied to both of us, and I have proof of everything. If you're feeling that surge of hope right now, that sense that justice is finally coming, hit that subscribe button, because we're about to watch truth dismantle every lie they built. James Morrison didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, he'd filed emergency motions with the probate court. The documents Naomi had found, combined with the original will in his possession, painted a damning picture. Daniel's family hadn't just misled Naomi. They'd committed fraud. They'd hidden legal documents, made false claims about the estate, and effectively stolen property and assets that legally belonged to her. The court hearing was scheduled for the following week. Richard Carter arrived with 2 attorneys, confident that his family's name and resources would prevail. But confidence crumbled quickly when James Morrison presented the evidence. Daniels was unambiguous. Witness, notarized, filed with the attorney 3 months before his death. There was no trust language that superseded it, no family protections that applied, no debt that negated the inheritance. Every claim they'd made to Naomi had been a fabrication. The judge, a woman named Sandra Coleman, who presided over probate cases for 20 years, read through the documents with increasing displeasure. When she looked up, her expression was severe. "Mr. Carter," she said, addressing Richard, "are you aware that concealing a will is a criminal offense in the state of Alabama?" Richard's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently to him. "Your Honor," the attorney began, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Judge Coleman's voice cut through the courtroom. A widow and her children were illegally evicted from their home based on deliberately false information about their legal rights. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. She turned to Naomi. "Mrs. Carter, I'm ordering the immediate return of all property and assets to you, as outlined in your late husband's will. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into potential criminal charges." The courtroom was silent. Richard's face had gone pale. Marcus stared at his hands. Patricia sat rigid, her expression frozen. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises and return all property." Judge Coleman continued. "Any failure to comply will result in contempt charges and potential arrest. Do you understand?" They nodded, unable to speak. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Word had spread about the case. A wealthy white family trying to disinherit a black widow and her biracial children. In the current climate, the story resonated beyond Millbrook. James Morrison made a brief statement outlining the facts. Naomi stood beside him, holding her daughter's hands, and said only, "My husband loved us. He made sure we would be protected. And truth matters more than money or family name." The story went viral within hours. Local news picked it up first, then state outlets, then national media. Social media amplified it with hashtags about justice and systemic racism. Support poured in from across the country. Messages from other widows who'd faced similar battles, from people who'd experienced discrimination, from those who simply believed in holding powerful families accountable. The Carter family's reputation in Millbrook collapsed almost overnight. Their church, which had prominently displayed the family name on a donor wall, quietly removed it. Country club members who considered them pillars of the community began avoiding them. Business associates distanced themselves. Some of the family members reached out to Naomi privately with apologies. She didn't respond. Their words came too late and meant too little. What mattered was that the lie had been exposed. The system that had seemed designed to protect people like them and exclude people like her had, this time, worked the way it was supposed to. Justice had been slow, but it had been real. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that truth always finds a way to surface, even when powerful people try to bury it. 3 months after court order, Naomi stood once again outside the Grand White House. But this time, she held keys in her hand. Her daughter stood beside her, not crying but smiling. The moving truck in the driveway was bringing their belongings back, not taking them away. The house looked the same white columns, same oak trees, same wraparound porch. But everything had changed. Naomi unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was empty now. The Carter family had removed their belongings during the court-ordered vacating period. The walls where family photos had hung showed pale rectangles where the paint had been protected from sunlight. She would fill those walls with her own photos, her daughters in the backyard, her late husband smiling at the camera, images of the life they'd built together, the life his family had tried to erase. But Naomi knew that simply reclaiming the house wasn't enough. She wanted Daniel's legacy to mean something beyond property and money. She established a scholarship fund in his name for students pursuing technology degrees, with priority given to students from underrepresented communities. She used part of the inheritance to create a legal aid fund for widows facing inheritance disputes, partnering with James Morrison to provide free representation to women who couldn't afford to fight for what was rightfully theirs. She spoke at community forums about the importance of documentation, about knowing your legal rights, about not letting intimidation tactics work. Her story became a teaching tool for estate planning attorneys and advocacy groups. Her daughters grew up in that house, secure in knowing that their father had loved them enough to protect them even after he was gone. They learned from watching their mother that grace and strength aren't opposites, that you can be kind while refusing to be broken, that you can forgive without forgetting, that standing up for yourself is an act of love toward those who depend on you. The Carter family members who'd orchestrated the fraud faced no criminal charges. The district attorney determined that prosecution would be difficult and that civil remedies were sufficient. But their names carried a stain that no amount of money or time would fully remove. In a small town where reputation is currency, they'd been bankrupted. Some people said Naomi should have been more forgiving. That family is family. That holding grudges serves no one. But Naomi knew the difference between forgiveness and enabling. She could forgive them for their prejudice while refusing to pretend it didn't matter. She could acknowledge their humanity while protecting herself and her children from their cruelty. The deeper lessons from her story extend beyond one family's greed. Documentation matters. Daniel's foresight, his carefully filed will, his letter, his choice of an attorney outside his family's influence, save his wife and daughters. Estate planning isn't just for the wealthy. It's protection for the people you love. Greed exposes character. The Carter family had resources, education, social standing. None of it prevented them from lying to a grieving widow and stealing from their own grandnieces. Money doesn't make people ethical. Pressure reveals who they really are. Truth is patient but persistent. Naomi could have accepted defeat. She could have believed their lies. But something in her insisted on digging deeper, on trusting that Daniel wouldn't have left them unprotected. Truth doesn't need volume. It just needs time and someone willing to seek it. Systemic challenges are real, but not insurmountable. Naomi faced racism, classism, and a legal system that often favors those with resources and connections. She won not because the system is fair, but because she had evidence, an honest attorney, and a judge who followed the law rather than social pressure. A mother's love is a powerful force. Naomi didn't fight for herself. She fought for her daughter's right to their father's legacy. That made her unstoppable. When you're protecting your children, compromise becomes impossible and persistence becomes inevitable. Naomi didn't just fight for a house or money, or even justice in the abstract. She fought for her daughters to know that their mother wouldn't let anyone erase their father's love, that their multiracial family was legitimate and valued, that truth and law could stand against prejudice and power. Standing in that reclaimed house, watching her daughters explore rooms that were rightfully theirs, Naomi thought about Daniel, about how he'd known his family well enough to protect her from them, about how love expresses itself not just in words, but in careful preparation and legal safeguards and letters sealed in envelopes. The house wasn't just property anymore. It was proof that their marriage mattered, that their family was real, that love and foresight and truth could defeat lies and prejudice and power. If this story moved you, smash that like button right now. Tell us in the comments, what would you do if someone tried to steal what was rightfully yours? How far would you go to protect your children's inheritance? And subscribe to Earthly Tales for more stories that prove justice, while slow and imperfect, is real. For stories that remind us that truth doesn't need a shout. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. For stories that show us that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or connections or family name. It's a mother who refuses to let her children be erased.